and welcome to the Northeast Georgia History Center's live stream about the history of tea. I am Marie Walker, and I am the director of the Ada Mae Ivester Education Center here, and it is my joy to welcome all of you to our virtual talk and tea time. If you have a cup of tea, go ahead and make yourself one, and you can sip it while we learn more about the history of the drink that you are drinking. I also wanted to let y'all know that we have made it to our January donation goal because of all of the wonderful viewers like you at home who have donated, so that we have now actually extended our goal that you can see right below here. So we have met our January donation goal of $100, and then because you are so amazing, we have extended that goal to our extended goal of $200. So if you are enjoying this presentation, anytime throughout this presentation, you can go to this side, this link right here, donate, and you can donate at bit.ly/jangoal, and you can donate there. So without further ado, we are going to begin at what we would consider the beginning of the history of tea. The history of tea is so ingrained in so many cultures, particularly in the Chinese culture, and the history of tea goes so far back there that it goes back to legend. This is where it really starts. So the Chinese legend about the beginning of tea, it starts in 2737 BCE. That's a really long time ago, but that's when this legend is set. There are different variations of this legend, but most of them include the Emperor Shennong, who is the skilled ruler and scientist. He's the Emperor of China, who is very much credited with the foundation of agriculture there. He accidentally discovers tea, and as the legend goes, it is when he is boiling water in the garden, a leaf from an overhanging wild tree drifted into his pot. This was from the tea plant. He was boiling water, the leaf drifts into this water. He then drinks the water, and he thinks it's amazing, it tastes good, it gives him nutrients, and continues to do so. And to promote this idea of tea, there are several different variations of this legend. As legends do, they have different accounts and different variations, but most of them coincide with, all of them include the Emperor Shennong and his discovery of tea. Of course, this is not the only legend about the discovery of tea, the creation of the tea plant. There is also the Indian legend with Prince Bani Drama, an Indian saint who founded the Zen school of Buddhism. It is said that he created the tea plant in 520. He left India to preach Buddhism to China, and to prove some Zen principles, he vowed to meditate for 9 years without sleep. And I have disappeared.
Oops, sorry.
And you're back. All right, so he said that he was going to meditate without sleep. I think this is continued on the next slide.
Right. And one second. There we go. The Indian legend.
Yes, it is continued. All right. So it is said that towards the end of his meditation, he began to fall asleep. And upon waking, he was so distraught that he fell asleep during his meditation that he cut off his eyelids and threw them on the ground. And then it is said that a tea plant sprung up on the spot where his eyelids landed to sanctify his sacrifice. So while it does seem unlikely that this is how the tea plant was indeed created, it goes hand in hand with a very real part of tea culture and tea, that Buddhist monks were very much used tea to keep them awake during their meditations, and that became very much a part of tea culture. And a part of their culture is that they would have tea either before or during, before their meditation, so that they could stay awake, because tea has a little bit of caffeine in it. So they're really using caffeine to make sure that they do not fall asleep during their meditations, and to be able to stay focused and to stay focused on their spiritual meditations. So the origins of the tea plant, they are of course these two legends, but tracing tea's original roots in perhaps a little bit more of a scientific manner proves very difficult because it's been around for so long. These legends are really, of course, they're still steeped in facts and such, or the facts are steeped in legends. But it's thought to have originated in regions around southwest China, Tibet, and northern India. That's where the tea plant is thought to be from and to have originated, and it grows well in those regions. So the classic age of tea is considered to be the Tang Dynasty in 618 to 907. And this is when the consumption became popular and widespread. Before this, tea had, of course, gained popularity and was gaining in popularity and was becoming more and more well known. But in the Tang Dynasty, this is really when tea is everywhere. It's very popular, and it's become so widespread that the government imposes a tea tax. You know, when the government taxes something, it's become available to a large amount of audience. It's very much going to be a moneymaker for them. Therefore, you can see that is as part of the popularity of tea. So tea was processed in the form of dried tea cakes. They were roasted and then ground before being brewed in hot water. And sometimes it would be with peppermint, ginger, and a citrus peel. So this is when we see tea becoming more of a fashionable drink, more of a tasty drink. Before this, it had more or less been a medicinal type of beverage. Some people think think of tea as being more medicinal. Tea can still be medicinal. Here we see medicinal and society tastiness being integrated. It's no longer just one or the other. Before this, going back even further, tea had been more of a salad-like thing, where the tea leaves would be eaten. I mean, you can still eat the leaves of a tea plant. I'm not sure how tasty that would be, but it had, especially by the Tang Dynasty, become standard practice to have a dried tea cake that you could then it would be roasted and then ground before you would brew it in hot water. Very similar to what we would do today. It gets even more closer to what we do today, but I'll get to that a little later. And then, of course, they're adding more things to the tea plant, like peppermint, ginger, and a citrus peel. So, during the classic age of tea, you have Lu Yu, who is alive from 1733 to 804, and he was a Buddhist monk, a writer, and a sage of tea, as he is known. And he composed the classic, or the classic of tea treatise. And in this work is really the defining work of tea. It goes through all the types of tea, the uses of tea, the preparation of tea, and the benefits of drinking tea. So these writings also included the spiritual elements of tea that reflected Buddhist, Taoist, and Confucian religious thoughts of the time. So it was centered around the traditional tea ceremony, is where you have these more religious influences, meaning more social influences around the drink of tea. So the tea ceremony was really a metaphor for expressing the harmony and the simplicity that not only ordered, but also streamed throughout the entire universe that can be seen in a cup of tea. And that is from the Buddhist monk's writings. And he's really credited for even further popularizing tea. So, Sideshow, who in the early 9th century, he was a Japanese Buddhist monk who then went to China to study there and to copy some writings and to learn more about what they were doing over in China, and then to bring those ideas back to Japan. not only did he bring more religious thought and writings, but he also introduced tea to Japan, and that's in the early 9th century. But tea really did not become popular in Japan until the 13th century because Saicho was indeed a Buddhist monk. He brought the tea plant back, but it really only became popular in his own sphere. It did not go farther out and popularized it. Monks are more clustered of people. They don't necessarily go and interact with the outside world all that much, depending on what order and what kind of monk they are. But as one, Saicho very definitely did not go out and spread the ideas of tea. It was something that he had found in China and brought back to Japan, but it took a very long time for tea and the ideas of tea to spread and to become popular in Japan, even though that they had been there for centuries before. So the Ming Dynasty, from 1368 to 1644 in China. This is when tea was prepared by steeping the whole leaf in water. So no more of the dried tea cakes, those had fallen out of favor. Now it is just putting the tea in water and steeping it that way, which is closer to what we do today with our tea bags. The tea leaves were dried, rolled, and then heated in ironworks to stop the oxidation process. So that's when you start having some different types of tea. So to brew the tea leaves, you would then steep them in hot water, which is very much like we would do today. So tea spreads. Obviously, tea is the most popular drink in the world, right behind water. So tea, of course, it originated in what most people would consider it originated in China and then spread in the 9th century, which of course that's when the last side, it was introduced to Japan. In the 9th century, we also have references of Arab trade documents that refer to the process of boiling bitter tea leaves. So it's spreading farther out to Middle Eastern countries. Marco Polo, the European explorer, who was alive during 1254 to 1324, alludes to his discovery of tea in his travel writings about the East. But it's really not until the 17th century does tea and the popularity of tea spread to Western Europe. So you have the Dutch East India Company, who is very, very much a part of the spread of tea and popularity of tea in Europe. A lot of countries in Europe do not end up getting tea until you have the colonialization of the world and colonial powers going and exploring and bringing back things to Europe. You do have some of it, of the spread of tea earlier by the Silk Road and different land roads that are traveled and trade routes. And this is an interesting thing that I learned in my study of this subject, is that the word tea, as we know it, T-E-A, is very much, it is from the Chinese symbol for tea, but it also, depending on different regions, it can also be pronounced chai, so tea and chai. So usually, if you see a country where it is pronounced tea or te or a very, very similar variation to that, it's because they received tea through a seaport. And if it is the word chai, they received tea from land routes first, because in different regions of China, the character for tea is pronounced either te or chai. The one where the seaport is pronounced te, and then the one where the land routes originated from was pronounced chai. So that's an interesting thing where you can see how different countries receive their tea by just the word, by the vernacular, which I thought was very interesting. So in Russia, which is far closer in landmass to China and had land routes with China, is pronounced, you would call tea chai, and versus England, and most of the European countries who did not interact with China in trade until seaports, is pronounced tea. So,
oops, sorry, I'll go.
We're just going to go back.
There we go.
All right, so in 1610, the first shipments of Japanese and Chinese tea arrived in Europe by ships chartered by the Dutch East India Company. You also have the England East India Company, but the Dutch East India Company is perhaps the more famous of the two. But they are very much going from Europe to the east, to China, to India, to Japan, bringing back valuable trade goods to Europe and taking European goods over there. So the popularity of tea spreads very rapidly across Europe, which includes cities like Amsterdam, Paris, and London. But tea was expensive. It's being imported from halfway across the world. So at the beginning of this tea import, only those who could afford it could really drink it. So it limited it to the aristocracy and those of wealth. So England and tea. When tea first arrived in England, England was not too keen on tea, which is hard to imagine now that it is its national beverage. Originally, England had been a coffee nation, so you have the coffee and tea wars have been around for a very, very, very long time. It was considered that coffee was more of a masculine drink and tea was more of a feminine drink that would then be drunk by genteel ladies, but coffee was hearty and proved your masculinity or something like that. So there was these connotations around tea and people who drank tea or coffee, and that went on for quite some time. But in 1669, the English East India Company brought tea from China, from ports in Java to the London markets. Again, didn't incredibly catch on until Catherine of Braganza popularized tea in the English court when she married King Charles II. So when Catherine came in and it was very popular in her own country, introduces it to Charles II, it is said that the first thing that she asked for when she arrived in England was tea. And of course, if the Queen is doing it, everyone else wants to emulate the Queen. It became incredibly fashionable. People wanted to come drink tea with Catherine. She popularized tea time. She popularized just England and tea, and having it grow into this incredible sensation that is now England's national drink. And you can't really think of England without tea, especially in America. So you could also cite tea as really causing the Opium Wars. Tea is a valuable commodity. As I said earlier, it was really, when it started first trading, it was really only available to the wealthy, to those who could afford it. It was exciting. It was what they considered to be foreign, especially in Europe. So it was valuable. But China, who really considered itself to be a self-sufficient nation at the time, and perhaps still to this day, did not believe that they needed really any of the English goods that they had. They just wanted English silver. They wanted straight up money. Well, England got tired of paying silver. They rather trade some type of other good that they could produce because they were running out of silver. So what did England have? They had opium. And as we know, opium is a very addictive substance. So it works if you're trying to trade people with an addictive substance, they would still want more and more and more of it. And that's kind of what happened with the Opium Wars. England was trading tea as well as other things with China. For those goods, they supplied opium because they got tired of paying silver. And then China decided, we don't want your drugs anymore. This is not good for our people. And then they kind of had their own Boston Tea Party, if you will, but they threw the opium over into the harbor. And well, that also sparked a war, which would be the Opium Wars. And there's the first Opium Wars, there's second Opium Wars. But the first Opium War happened in 1839 to 1842, fought between China and Britain. And this was China's attempt to suppress the opium trade. And Britain had been trading silver for tea, but then they began trading opium. And as I said, China decided that they no longer wanted the opium, but Britain still wanted the tea, which caused a war. That's a very simplified version of that, but in essence. So tea is very valuable. So tea plantations in India. So at the time with this whole opium war situation, Britain, who has become incredibly obsessed with tea and loves tea, still wants tea, and China, who they're at war with, doesn't really want to trade tea with them anymore. So China had always really been hesitant about trading with the West and European nations, even before the Opium Wars began, because they saw it as an outside influence that they were not really wanting. But the difficulty of obtaining Chinese tea, especially with the Opium War going on, began to promote Britain to grow their own tea. They were like, well, maybe we don't need China for our tea. Maybe we can do it ourselves. So they began to look around for a place that would be a good place to grow tea on their own. And they decided that the climate and the high altitudes of northern India made it a promising location for tea cultivation. So there was this man named Robert Fortune, who was a Scottish botanist, and he was spying on China's sacred tea processing techniques. He disguised himself. He went into China because at that time, Europeans were not allowed farther than port cities in China, but Robert Fortune disguised himself and made his way through to see how China grew their tea plants and what kind of plants. At this time, England believed that there were different tea plants for different types of tea, but actually it's all the same tea. It's just how you process it would be different. Like green tea and black tea still comes from the same plants, just how you process it. But they didn't realize that. They thought that there was a green tea plant and they thought there was a black tea plant, and different types of tea plants for each one. So he learned that there was a lot in the process and the processing of the tea plant that actually created different types of tea. Of course, then you also have different types of stuff that you can put in tea, but that's different as well. So Robert Fortune goes into China. He's spying on how to make tea, on how tea is grown, the processes of it, and then he smuggles out some tea plants, as well as several of these Chinese tea masters agree to come with him to help with the cultivation and the processing of tea for Britain. So him and his caravan smuggle out some tea plants as well as these Chinese tea specialists, and they come to northern India. And they return to India with this knowledge, equipment, and a small team of these experienced Chinese growers, and they began to grow tea on their own tea plantations. So now India, to this day, is a world leader in tea production. 70% of the tea that it produces actually is consumed within India itself. Tea is very popular in India as well as literally everywhere around the world. And each culture has their own way of preparing tea. Is it a milky tea? Is it a honey tea? What kind of spices do they put in the tea? And there's about as many different types of ways of preparing tea as there are cultures around the world, which I find to be incredibly fascinating. India is really known for their Assam tea and Darjeeling tea. Assam is one of the states in India, areas in India where tea is grown and has been grown since Robert Fortune smuggled out those tea plants, is in that area, and it's one of the leading producers of tea on tea plantations. So the tea industry has grown to, in India, the tea industry has grown to own many global tea brands, and it's a leader in the tea industry, but most of the tea workers to this day are women who face exploitation and are not paid well for their work. So now, of course, you have America and tea, a long and storied history. So tea initially came to America in the mid-1600s by way of the Dutch settlement of New Amsterdam. Of course, we could infer that that would be from the Dutch East India Trading Company, bringing different things to the colonies, different goods to the colonies. Of course, the Dutch settlement of New Amsterdam is just a few decades later. It is conquered by the British and it is named New York. Still a huge port and city of trade to this day. So that is where tea is originally introduced to. It catches on okay. Once Britain takes over New York and Britain is having their continued love affair of tea, it gains more and more popularity in the United States as well, or the colonies that would become the United States. Of course, one of the most famous tea parties to ever happen in America was the Boston Tea Party, and that is when the 13 colonies are on the verge of rebellion, or at least a large population are becoming unsettled with the British government and the way the British government is doing things, and are incredibly unhappy on the tax on tea. Tea was one of the most popular drinks at the time. This would be like having an imposed soda tax today, where people got very angry that they were going to have to pay even more money to enjoy their favorite beverage. So there were the Sons of Liberty, who were an organization of mostly young men, disguised themselves as Mohawk American Indians and got onto these tea ships in the harbor and began to throw crates of tea over into the Boston harbor, causing millions of dollars in damages to the East India Trading Company, who also was pretty much had a monopoly on tea at the time, but that's a whole nother issue. This, of course, caused the Intolerable Acts, the Acts of Sedition, the closing of the Boston harbor, and people began to get scared that the British government was tyrannical and going to shut down the entire American economy if America did not submit and pay their outrageous taxes, or at least what Americans considered to be outrageous taxes. So tea never really regained popularity in America after that. It is not one of America's most popular drinks. Coffee in America is far more popular than tea. I honestly, from my historical perspective, would say that the Boston Tea Party was the end of American tea consumption. Truly is never, and like tea just never regained popularity in America. It was so much associated with Britain, and still is very much associated with Britain, that America, trying to establish its own identity, did not want to have anything to do with Britain. And also after the taxes and the notoriety that the Boston Tea Party had at the time of the American Revolution and going forward, as it became kind of this almost mythical happening. Of course, it actually happened, but just all of the emotions surrounding that and the founding of the nation. No one wants to be seen supporting a British good or anything that would be un-American, which might be tea. Now that is until the 19th century. All right, it's been about 100 years. Maybe we can try tea again. And there was a man at the St. Louis World's Fair in Missouri, and he had brewed a lot of tea for the day to sell to different participants who were going to come to the fair and look around, see the new things that were happening, the new technologies, maybe ride a Ferris wheel. But it was a very hot day, and no one wanted to have hot tea on a hot day. Hot beverages are, especially in the South, are really only popular during the winter. In the summer, it is far too hot to drink a hot beverage. So this man, who had just invested a lot of money in creating a lot of hot tea to try to sell to people, decided, what am I going to do? It's such a hot day, no one's going to want a hot drink. So he goes over to the ice cream station and he gets a lot of ice and he makes iced tea. Now, iced tea is what I would actually argue that iced tea is the American version of tea. As I have said earlier, every culture really has their own version and make of tea. I would argue that iced tea is the American version of tea. And iced tea actually makes up around 80% of the entire US tea market sales. So it's rather popular, especially in the South and the Midwest. I actually have had, when I have gone north and friends have gone north, some of them have, oh, thank you, David Spear, for donating $5. Thank you.
Yay, thank you.
When I and friends have gone north, mysteriously sweet tea, especially iced sweet tea, is not on the menu. And if you ask them for tea, they will bring you a hot cup of tea, which is not what it makes everyone very confused, because that's not what we thought would happen when we ordered. So it's interesting that it's also perhaps a slightly more regional drink. But of course, the hot tea, the tea that came in from New Amsterdam, what I would consider to be the more traditional tea, is when you have the loose leaf steeped in hot water. That is where that really originated, and still has more of a hold than it does in the South and the Midwest, where sweet tea reigns supreme. And as I was saying, I would argue that sweet tea is, especially in the Southern and Midwest America, the preferred version of tea consumption, as it makes up about 80% of the entire US sales market for tea, as well as it's just the way that America prepares tea. I think it's an interesting look, as each culture does have its own way of preparing tea, steeped in its own culture and history. All right, so we have some resources. If you would like to continue to further learn about the history of tea, we only have so much time here. We call it In a Nutshell Histories, where we give a brief overview of the subject. There is still so much more to learn and to discover about the history of tea that has such a long and storied history that we are now going to recommend some more resources if you would like to continue this journey and research yourself. So some of the resources that we would recommend are the book, The Social History of Tea, Tea's Influence on Commerce, Culture, and Community by Bruce Richardson and Jane Pettigrew, The Story of Tea, a cultural history and drinking guide by Mary Lou Hess and Robert J. Hess. And then For All the Tea in China, How England Stole the World's Favorite Drink and Changed History by Sarah Rose, which we talked a little bit about today, but of course this book goes into far more detail than the few slides that we had. And then if you're just interested in a nice overview about tea, you can go to www.britannica.com and search tea for some articles and videos to further give a more general scope.
All right. Thank you so much, Marie.
Absolutely.
And hello to everyone in the chat. I'm Libba from behind the scenes, working the slides and reading the chat. And I'm also sipping some tea. I know that all of pretty much everyone in the chat seems to be sipping tea. So I'm so glad that y'all got to enjoy this beverage as we learned so much about it. Indeed, what a lot of tea. Incredible history going back thousands of years. Now we do have a few questions.
All right, I'll see if I can answer this.
Yeah, so Sue is asking about those different types of tea plants, and so Sue is wondering if the most popular tea plants did all come from that single plant, which is the scientific name, I hope I'm saying it right, is Camellia sinensis, Camellia sinensis, and you are correct. So as Marie was talking about Darjeeling teas, Assam tea as well, and those are going to come from that same tea leaf. Sue also mentioned that there are different types of tea leaves, but that is the one that is cultivated the most and seems to be the most popular. Marie, I had no idea that green tea and black tea come from the same tea. I always assumed that it was a different type of tea leaf. I'm wondering, what from your research, what was something that was really surprising to you that you didn't know before?
Oh, I think the most interesting thing I found out was about the tea and the chai, and how you
Yeah.
can kind of figure out from where the tea from that country came from based on especially like Europe and America and South America. Um, uh, Countries basically other than the continent of Asia, if it came via land or via sea by if it's called tea or chai.
Yeah, I thought that was fascinating too. I had no idea. So next time I order a chai at Starbucks, it's probably not the same kind of chai that they were drinking way back when, but I'll think of that.
Yeah.
Let's see. We also have a YouTuber asking. We have a Rage Guy asking about what can you tell us about American tea plantations like in Hawaii or South Carolina? And I mean, since we're in Georgia, we might as well talk about the fact that Georgia was did cultivate tea in the colonial days. What else can you tell us about tea plantations in America?
Yes, so tea was not necessarily one of the larger cash crops in colonial America, but there's actually, I think, what our viewer might be interested in learning about is the ones that are still going. There's actually one tea plantation or tea garden that is located in South Carolina.
Probably South Carolina,
South
since that
Carolina.
has a more of a history of tea plantations.
Yes, that is continue. It's I'm not sure if it's new or if it's uh, a continuation of one, but that's still going to this day that you can visit. You can look them up online. I thought that it was very interesting. They continue to cultivate tea and to make tea grown in America. It's one of the few left in America, as there are a lot more in other parts of the world. India being a very large producer of tea itself.
Yeah, and they did mention Hawaii as well, and just a little factoid. I'm seeing that tea was introduced to Hawaii in 1887,
All right.
and was commercially grown until 1892. So a short history, but nonetheless, still a history there. It looks like that. Hawaii produced tea, Alabama produced tea, South Carolina, and colonial Georgia. So it seems like those are the big states for tea. Now I'm going to check the chat to see if we have any other questions, but in the meantime, I also just wanted to thank all of our new viewers here. I know that it's always great when we have a big crowd here. So I know that a lot of you might be new to the Northeast Georgia History Center. While I scan the chat, Marie, will you just introduce our new viewers to who we are and what we do every week, every Wednesday at 2 p.m.
So welcome to the Northeast Georgia History Center. I'm Marie. Behind the scenes, we have Libba. We also have Glenn, who will come and do presentations with all of you. We started doing these live streams when we had to close our doors to the public almost a year ago in March because of the COVID-19 pandemic. When we had to close our doors because of the threat of the virus, we decided, well, we can still do our mission of serving our public and education virtually. So we began to do a live stream on a topic every single day until we could open our doors again back in the summer. And they were so popular that we decided to continue to do live streams. Not every day, because we ended up we have other things that we also have to do.
We wish, but
we wish we could. we do a whole lot of other things as well. But we decided to continue to do a program on a topic every single Wednesday that is free to the public, and we thank you so much for those who have been able to donate it. You make these programs possible as well. We also have our digital memberships that we started after all of this, where we provide, you can have an additional talk. Sometimes those are slightly more niche subjects where we get more into the meat of a topic versus our Wednesday live programs where we talk more about the general overview of a subject, if you will. And you can become a digital member by joining us at the Northeast Georgia History Center with our digital memberships. They're only $3 a month or $35 for the whole year, and you get a lot of fun talks every single Friday, as well as some special things that get thrown in there. But if you would like to become a digital member, you can sign up. I'm sure Libba will put the links in the chat.
I just did.
All right, so you can join us there.
Yes, so that's a great overview, and looks like the question we do have is some ideas for live streams, and also
wonderful.
So going through, I think it would be a great idea to go through some kind of tea ceremony, whether it is or maybe tea etiquette.
Yes.
That would be really fun. So thank you.
There's a lot of different cultures that have different formalities surrounding tea.
Yeah. So thank you, Keekers. I hope I'm saying that okay. For that suggestion. That's a great idea. We love suggestions from our audience. I also see Rage Guy wants to know what will be the next live stream. Well, our next members live stream is this Friday at 2 p.m. Eastern. So every Friday, of course, as Marie was saying, we have our members only live streams, and those are only $3 a month or $35 a year to become a digital member of the Northeast Georgia History Center. And we're having a living history performance by Mustafa Slack. He is an excellent actor and living history interpreter, and he is going to be interpreting Martin Luther King Jr. because it is Martin Luther King Jr.'s birthday coming up. I do believe this Friday, or is it's Monday on the 18th. We're having a program, I do believe.
Yes, it is on Friday because that is the closest date to it.
Yes.
So
you're going to see Mustafa interpret MLK. You're also going to hear the section of I Have a Dream speech. He does it beautifully. And then there's going to be a Q&A with Glenn and Mustafa, out of character, talking about MLK's life and times and the impact of his legacy. Now, our next general live stream for everybody, even if you are not a member, that is going to be next Wednesday, and I'm excited about this one because Glenn is going to be hosting an event about historical European martial arts. Now, before this, it didn't quite click for me. What is European martial arts? But these are things like basic different types of sword fighting. So you know karate, taekwondo, jiu-jitsu, and other fighting systems like that in Asia, but Europe also does have this long history of fighting arts. So Glenn's also going to be demonstrating some of those moves. Yes. So I do hope you will join us. Please make sure that you are subscribing to our YouTube channel, that you're following us on Facebook, and of course we always appreciate any donations that you may offer us, as so much of what we do is digital and free. Yes. and while of course you understand that nonprofits during this time, it's been tough, and it's because of folks like you that we're able to push through. Thank you. Yes. So let me check the chat one more time just to see if we have any last minute questions. I love all of these comments. Trust us, we are going to read through all of your wonderful comments.
We appreciate them. They sustain us as well. It's a good boost in morale when we go through all of your wonderful comments.
It really is, and it's so great to see folks tuning in for the first time. So it looks like, I hope I didn't skip anyone's questions. Will Glenn cover some Krav Maga? I don't know what that is, but I'm not sure. Probably. Oh, thank you, Lorraine. Thank you so much for your donation of $5. We appreciate that so much, Lorraine. All right. I think that we've answered all of your questions. I do hope we see you next Wednesday, or maybe even this Friday. So thank you all again. This is a production of the Cottrell Digital Studio at the Northeast Georgia History Center. I'm Libba, and that's Marie, and we can't wait to see you in the past, in the future. All right. Take care, y'all. Bye.
Bye.